Thank you. Just for maybe for Professor Emri, we talked, okay, you said probably from your point of view that this relationship is, let's say, need. I mean religion as a need, but how is with natural sciences? This is not very the explanation from natural science. If you want to add something.
I think humans, we want answers. Everybody wants answers. No matter what, let me use this word, no matter how capable he is in his abstract thinking, he wants answers. Now, depending on your capability of abstract thinking, this is how much you can go into science. Because you cannot be a mathematician if you don't have very abstract capability of abstract thinking. So now, everybody wants answers, but certain answers he cannot understand. So if he demands answers, we have to come up with an answer. Or you say, forget about it, that's two possibilities. Or you try to explain to them something, and this is what religion did. In many ways, because they didn't have other explanations. See, if you go back to Newton, he would show him this. That's miracle for him. He didn't understand. He didn't understand, you see, at the time when he lived. Vector algebra didn't exist. He didn't, major things he didn't understand. Whatever we are teaching today, he didn't understand. So, definitely, if somebody asked him to explain, he was explaining somehow. Now, if you go back, this is when the science and religion started probably together. If you look all these philosophers and so forth, they were doing everything. So they were explaining in the way they did, and if you read all these philosophers, and probably read many more books than I did, you see that this is all interweaving. They are using sort of scientific explanation, philosophical explanation, so it's all interweaving. Later on, this path, why? Because everybody goes and studies, and the majority of us are not capable of studying everything. So if I would be living in the time of Aristotle, probably I would be just a peasant, because my capabilities in other parts, not maybe in the scientific part, are so poor that I would be spelled out. Only selected people were really doing everything. Now that's also what contributed to this separation. And of course, religion is the oldest, if you wish, mental activity. I shouldn't say science, though maybe you can call it religious science or whatever. They have the longest history, and they were developing this, and this is why this all came out. This is how it is. And that's tradition, they keep that, people like that, and that's what it is. And I think this has nothing to do with the concept of God, concept of explaining what we see in every day. We are not capable of explaining. Okay? So these are, for me, these are different things. Religion as such, and what we are essentially talking now, are two different things. Institutions, and all these mechanisms, people, hierarchies, and so forth, that it is something else. It has nothing to do with spiritual part. Maybe I'm not.
Thank you, Professor Ule.
I have to say firstly that I'm very against this conception that science is only for elected people and very intelligent people, let's say, if I say it simply, and religion for everybody. I think it's a misconception because religion is something also very, very, very hard. And it's not at all for everybody who doesn't believe in God. It's very hard to find God if you don't believe in Him. Well, that's one point. The other point is that here I'm skeptical towards these psychological issues here, because it's not a question of, we're going to discuss, I understand this discussion not on the level of psychology, on the level, let's say, of the development of, at first it was because people couldn't do science in the ancient times and they had to do religion. That's a kind of positivistic point, viewing religion from science, viewing religion as something which was in the past and so on. I would prefer to come back to the main issue here, which I think is one of the main issues, to the issue of design. Because in this question, I apologize that I misquoted the title of the book, but look, the question is who?
You said misquoted, I didn't write it.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Don't apologize.
Okay, well, it's Stephen Hawking's book, in fact. Yeah, but as I followed your bibliography, and so I got the impression that you are one of the fervent, let's say, discussion opponents towards Stephen Hawking, and that's why I mentioned it. And from the point of Stephen Hawking, of course, this question of whose design is in some sense meaningless, because he says, well, the world is eternal, and it is like in Taoism, for example, well, it will ever be and ever was, and so on. The question of some creator is from his specific point meaningless. If we put aside all these subjects about multiverse, about several histories and so on, which is another possible answer to design. But I want to put this question today in cosmology, in philosophical cosmology. Most of the arguments for God are concentrated around cosmological design, around fine-tuning, because the ancient cosmological arguments, like in Thomas Aquinas, they are treated as well sometimes, for example, William Craig or somebody speaks about that. Okay, but there's a big question about time, what is time and so on. Here, concerning design, it's more obvious in some sense that we find in the universe some kind of design of these basic parameters, fine-tuning and so on. And I would like to hear your opinion about that. Is it really a very evidence for God, the creator of the world, or not? I mean, this fine-tuning and design, because I think we have several variants for explaining it.
Would you like me to respond to that? I think it is evidence. How powerful it is another question. For me, the evidence for God is cumulative, and it comes from many, many different directions. I'm very interested. I had a debate with Professor Millikan, who you may know in Oxford, who's Professor of Philosophy. And he said to me before I met his students, that 50 of his students to grill me one evening after dinner, you see. And he said, you know, I want to hear you come to the strongest argument you Christians have from science. I said, what's that, Peter? He said, the fine-tuning argument. He said, if I wanted to argue for God, I would argue on this basis. And I think there is power to it, because it's not a God of the gaps argument. It's an argument based on increasing scientific knowledge of the extreme fine-tuning of the constant of nature. And what interests me is not so much my reaction to it, but the reaction of people who are not necessarily theists. And that perhaps substantiates one of your other points. But Paul Davis, with whom I've discussed...
Favorites.
Yeah, he is of mine. And I said, Paul, you know, I use your argument all the time. Why aren't you a theist? You see. And he says, in one of his books, he says the evidence for design is overwhelming. And even Mark Tegmark, who was one of the fathers of the multiverse thing, said at Princeton, he said, look, you have two possibilities. You've either got a multiverse or there's a creator. Now, philosophers, of course, have been very quick to point out that those are not true alternatives. God can create as many universes as he likes. But it seems to me that it is an evidence amongst many other evidences. And you could say with many people, you could differentiate between an argument from design and an argument to design, which means, roughly speaking, that you can either say, here is an object, it shows design, and that implies that there must be a designer. Or you can go the weaker way, which is to say, look, the design of that object is consistent with the existence of a designer in whom I believe on other grounds. And I would want to, in one sense, have it both ways. I think there is evidence. It's not proof in the mathematical sense. I would agree with you there. But it seems to me that the stronger evidence is the semiotic evidence. That's the evidence of text and so on and so forth. That's beginning to be a major discussion with people like Thomas Nagel and so on. So I would say it's a pointer, but it's a pointer to what? Intelligence, power, but not much beyond that. I'm very careful of these limitations, but I think it is in evidence. In other words, it doesn't seem to me to be obviously pointing in the other direction. Now, one other point you made there, and that interests me too, is the whole notion of the eternity of the universe or multiverse. I'm sure you've Alex Delenkin and Alan Guth, their recent work seems to indicate that no matter what view you take, you come back to a full stop. These are their, I don't profess to understand the detail of the theorem, but Delenkin assured me that it's now certain that the eternal universe or multiverse is out.
But still, many people still speak this idea of multiverse.
Oh, they do, but often it's not a question of science but preference.
Okay.
I mean, Sir Martin Rees, who's our astronomer royal, he says, look, in his book Just Seats Numbers, some people prefer, he says, like my teacher, Sir John Polkinghorne, prefer to believe that there's a God who's behind this. I prefer to believe in a multiverse. Well, once you talk about preference, you're way beyond science.
Only just a short remark. I think that the main dilemma here, it's not perhaps between, as you put it, between multiverse and God, as Stegmark put it, for example, but between multiverse and, on the other hand, teleology of nature, some telos in nature, some purpose, some telos in nature. And it's not quite the same as it's not quite the same as theistic God. That's my point. Well, because teleology itself, it's not, for example, in Aristotle or somewhere in the old teleology, it's not direct argument for God. It could be immanent teleology, it could be a design, a holistic design, something like this. So there are several other possibilities to explain fine-tuning and this apparent design. It's not only theism on the one hand, or atheism like a sort of cosmic Darwinism or neo-Darwinism on the other hand. I think you have several third ways here in between, and one of these ways is, for example, just Paul Davies, with his idea of cosmic blueprint and so on.
Yes, well, we mustn't have the discussion. All I would say is, in the end, we have to decide. I mean, to decide our worldviews. But why? We all do decide our worldviews on the basis of available evidence.
As humanists, yes, but as scientists, do we have to decide in this dilemma? Sorry, I have interrupted you.
No, but my point would be, I would agree with you if the science was all we had. But since the science is not all that we have, I believe that there's a revelation of God with which those pointers towards intelligent design are completely consistent. I would sit with you if I believed with you that religion and science are completely human constructs. But since I believe that God has revealed himself in history and in space-time, that's something that I must factor into it. I don't share, in other words, that presupposition. But I would agree with you if you limit yourself purely to the science.